I'd always loved the quiet hum of a hotel lobby, the clinking of glasses from the bar, the murmur of strangers checking in, the gentle sweep of luggage wheels over marble floors. It should have been just another ordinary afternoon at Crystal Bay Resort, a place where families arrived smiling, ready to build memories by the ocean. But ordinary is deceptive. In the middle of polished calm, one sharp voice cut the air like broken glass. Before I go on, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment where a single sentence made you feel invisible? If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or humiliated, I'd like you to share your feelings in the comments. And please tell me what city or state you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. If you find meaning here, don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 75 years old, and for decades I worked with my bare hands and sheer will to build hotels like this one from the ground up. But to my own family, at least in that moment, I was no one. The receptionist had just greeted us with a warm smile when my daughter-in-law Vanessa snapped. She leaned forward, manicured finger stabbing the air in my direction. "Don't listen to her!" she barked loud enough for every guest within earshot to turn their heads. "She's just the help we brought along." I felt the heat rush to my face, the sting of humiliation sharper than the salt air drifting in from the ocean. The young woman behind the desk faltered, glancing between us, her professional mask slipping as discomfort spread across her features. And then the sound that hollowed me out, my son Richard's laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not the kind you use to smooth over a tense moment. No, this was genuine amusement. The kind that says, "Yes, I'm in on the joke and she deserves it." In that instant, I wanted to disappear into the marble floor, swallowed by the same building I had once fought tooth and nail to own. But I stood still, my grip tight on the handle of my small suitcase, my back straighter than my heart felt. What no one in that lobby knew, what even Richard and Vanessa had never bothered to ask, was that Crystal Bay Resort wasn't just a vacation spot for me. It was mine. My late husband's passing had left me with nothing but debts and a young boy to raise, so I worked 16-hour days in a small seaside inn until I could buy and rebuild it. From that seed, I grew a chain of 12 properties, each one carved out of sleepless nights and sacrifices no one else had to endure. Yet here I was, reduced to nothing by the people I had given everything to. The guests around us whispered. Some raised their phones, recording a spectacle that wasn't theirs to own. And off to the side, I noticed a boy no older than 17, Tommy, one of the new bellhops, frozen in place, his wide eyes fixed on me. Unlike the others, there was no mockery in his gaze, only a stunned kind of compassion. I didn't speak. Not then. Silence can be a shield as much as it is a wound, but deep inside I felt something stir. This wasn't the first time my son had chosen comfort over character, but it was the first time the world had watched it unfold. And that difference, public, undeniable, irreversible, was the beginning of everything that followed. The sting of that moment in the lobby didn't fade when the elevator doors closed. I told myself I would not let it ruin everything. This trip, after all, had been my idea of hope. I had prayed that a week together might bridge the gap between me, Richard, and the family he had chosen. Perhaps in Florida's sunlight we could rediscover laughter. Perhaps I could finally feel like more than a tolerated presence in their lives. But hope has a way of collapsing quietly. By the second day, I realized the rhythm of our vacation had no place for me. Mornings began with Richard and Vanessa discussing golf tee times and spa treatments as if I weren't even at the table. Their voices blended smooth and rehearsed while mine vanished into silence. When I asked about plans for the children, Vanessa would smile thinly and say, "Oh, Eleanor, you'll manage. That's your specialty, isn't it? Keeping busy with the little ones." So I became the unpaid babysitter. Sophie and James, 10 and 7, absorbed in their tablets, rarely looked up. I tried asking about school, about their friends, but they answered in single syllables, their attention already drifting back to the glowing screens. And when they did speak, their words carried a sharper sting, little phrases Vanessa had planted, repeating them with innocent cruelty. "Mom says you used to clean houses for rich people. Is that true, Grandma?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that trembled. No, sweetheart, I built hotels, I created jobs for people, that's what I do. But Sophie shrugged, unconvinced, and James giggled. Mom says you just pretend to be important. Each word dug deep. I had once worked until my hands blistered to give Richard opportunities I never had. Now his children, the ones I had dreamed of spoiling with stories, cookies, and love, looked at me through the lens of Vanessa's disdain. The cruelest cut came one evening after dinner. Sophie, shy and hesitant, slipped a folded paper into my hands when no one was watching. It was a drawing of us. She had drawn me with gray hair, smiling, holding her hand at the beach. Tears welled up instantly. I whispered, "It's beautiful, darling. Thank you." But Vanessa noticed. She snatched the paper from my hand, crumpled it, and tore it clean in half before Sophie's wide eyes. "Don't waste your time on her," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your grandmother has nothing to give you." Sophie's cheeks flushed with shame, and she turned away, retreating into the safe glow of her tablet. I sat frozen, the pieces of that torn drawing like shards of my own heart scattered across the table. Richard said nothing, just stirred his coffee, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. That night alone in my room overlooking the ocean, I pressed the torn fragments flat on the desk, smoothing them with shaking fingers. The waves outside roared softly, but inside it was the silence that deafened me. The silence of a son unwilling to defend his mother, the silence of grandchildren robbed of the truth, and the silence I had forced upon myself for far too long. Hope had brought me here. Now it was slipping away, replaced by something darker, heavier, and far more dangerous, the realization that silence was no longer protecting me. It was destroying me. The night after Sophie's drawing was torn to pieces, I found myself wandering the resort grounds, too restless to sleep. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and hibiscus, the kind of tropical perfume that should have soothed me. Instead, each breath felt sharp, filling me with the ache of everything left unsaid. I walked along the pool deck past cabanas draped in white canvas when voices carried through the warm evening air, familiar voices I had not expected to hear. I froze. Richard's low chuckle, Vanessa's clipped, amused tone, and then another pair of voices, a man and a woman I didn't know. My heart thudded as I crept closer, pressed against the shadow of a palm tree. The drapes of the cabana shifted just enough for sound to spill out. "She's getting old," Vanessa said matter-of-factly. "Old people don't live forever. Honestly, we're just waiting her out." A woman laughed, high-pitched and cruel. "Vanessa, you're terrible." "I'm practical," she replied smoothly. "Richard's an only child. When she's gone, everything falls to us. The only question is how long we'll have to babysit her." I gripped the tree trunk to steady myself, the rough bark biting into my palm. Every word sliced deeper than the last. Then Richard's voice, the boy I raised, the man I once believed would protect me. "Don't worry. Mom doesn't have anything of her own. She lives on my support. Everyone thinks she's poor. I've been covering her bills for years." I nearly stumbled forward, my breath caught in my throat. A lie, bold and effortless, slipping off his tongue as though it had been rehearsed. I lived in a penthouse. I funded his children's schooling. I had been paying his mortgage when his business failed. And yet here he was telling strangers that I was a burden. Lucas, the man's voice, now joined in with mocking ease. "Well, when she starts slipping, just ship her off to some state-run nursing home. Problem solved." Laughter followed, casual, thoughtless, like they were discussing the weather. I pressed my hand against my chest as if I could physically hold my heart together. For 75 years, I had endured hardship, loss, and sacrifice, but nothing cut like this, my own flesh and blood, dismissing my life as disposable. And then the final twist of the knife. Vanessa's voice dripping with disdain. The best part is she still believes she matters. She even told the kids she built hotels. A pause, then a scoff. "It's pathetic, really. She's delusional." I leaned back against the palm tree, dizzy with grief. I thought of Sophie's drawing of James repeating Vanessa's cruel little lessons. It wasn't just that they wanted my death. They wanted my story erased, rewritten, until I was nothing but their caricature of a pitiful old woman. Later in my room, I opened my purse with trembling hands and pulled out my wallet. I checked my credit statements online, something I rarely did, trusting Richard to handle what little access he had. My stomach knotted as the numbers appeared: designer boutiques, luxury dinners, spa packages, all charged to a card linked to my name. Tens of thousands, maybe more. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, dressed in the thin disguise of family loyalty. That night I didn't cry. My tears had dried somewhere between the palm tree and the glowing screen of my laptop. What replaced them was sharper, cleaner, a blade forged in anger and clarity. I had been silent too long, mistaking silence for peace. Now I understood peace without respect is only another form of captivity, and I was done being captive. I didn't sleep that night. The ocean sounded the same, steady, indifferent, but inside me everything had shifted. Hearing them plot my erasure was like being flayed alive, but the rawness brought a terrible clarity. Shame had been the anesthetic I'd been using for decades. I had covered hurts with smiles and small favors, thinking gentleness would keep the peace. It didn't. It bought me exploitation. It was time to stop buying silence with my dignity. First thing in the morning, I called Jonathan Blake. He's the man I trusted when legal storms came sharp, pragmatic, the sort who can turn paperwork into armor. His voice over the line was a balm, and a bell calm but waking me. Tell me everything, he said. So I told him the lobby insult, the broken drawing, the cabana conversation I'd overheard, and the transactions I'd found on the linked card. I could hear the gears turning in his head. Don't do anything rash, he warned, but gather proof. We'll make this fail-proof. Proof. The word felt like a key. Evidence is the language the world understands when feelings alone won't move it. I didn't have to be loud. I had to be precise. I needed records, witnesses, timestamps, an unassailable trail that would expose the theft and the cruelty. Maya was the first ally I thought of. She's the resort manager, steady, discreet, and one of the few people who never bowed to Vanessa's temper. Years ago, when I opened the first inn, Maya was a young front desk clerk who watched me hand-roll linen standards and insist on treating every staff member like a person. Over time, she rose through the ranks and she'd earned my respect, so I trusted her. I asked to see her in private. Standing in the small office behind the reception, I watched her face change from curiosity to quiet resolve when I laid out the situation. We'll get it all, she said. I'll pull every bill, every charge, every special request they made, and I'll check staff reports. Then there was Tommy, the kid I'd seen in the lobby, the bellhop with the wide, honest eyes. He had an almost old soul loyalty that surprised me. Maybe watching someone with a backbone matters more than being told what's right. I found him stacking towels by the pool and asked him a simple favor: keep a careful log. Note every instance of rudeness, every order barked at a housekeeper. Every time they treated someone like they were invisible. It felt odd deputizing a teenager, but his willingness steadied me. I'll write it down, ma'am, he said. I've seen it before. I'll help. We moved like a small, deliberate current. Quiet, purposeful, invisible to those who believed arrogance could hide sin. Maya pulled past receipts flagged a string of spa bookings and gourmet dinners that matched the fraudulent charges I'd seen. Tommy returned with short, sharp notes, dates, times, names, instances of snide remarks, demands for special treatment, and the night Vanessa ripped Sophie's drawing. Each piece clicked into place. As the paperwork and witness notes accumulated on my desk, I felt the old weight of helplessness lift a little. There's a strange power in watching a truth assemble itself, columns of numbers, an inventory of insults, a chorus of small testimonies that together form a verdict. I was no longer the silent woman who swallowed humiliation to keep a family portrait unwrinkled. I was a person reclaiming the ledger of her life. That evening, standing in my room as the sunset painted the bay, I rehearsed nothing dramatic. I only promised myself this: if they treated me as invisible, I would make their deeds visible. Not out of spite, but out of justice. Because dignity is not a gift you receive. It's a right you insist upon. And I, at 75, was insisting. By the third evening, my evidence was stacked neatly in a folder, waiting like a loaded weapon. I carried it in my handbag, not for comfort, but for certainty. When Vanessa announced she had reserved the grand dining hall for a special evening with her new acquaintances, the Hendersons, the Carters, the stylish couple from Boston, I knew this was the stage she had been rehearsing for. What she didn't know was that I, too, had rehearsed. The Horizon Room glittered that night. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light onto linen-draped tables, and the windows opened to a view of the ocean glowing silver under the moon. Guests murmured with polite laughter, glasses of wine catching the light. I entered quietly, guiding Sophie and James to a side table as Vanessa swept in like royalty, Richard trailing obediently behind her. She wore a gown the color of midnight, her smile wide, her eyes sharp. "Eleanor," she said sweetly enough for the room to hear, "why don't you keep the children entertained? They get restless with grown-up conversation." She waved me toward the corner, her hand dismissing me as if I were a nanny she'd hired for the night. Richard didn't object. He never did. I sat in the corner with the children while courses of lobster and champagne arrived, their laughter echoing across the room. Vanessa raised her glass, dazzling her new friends with tales of vacations and future investments. Every so often her eyes flicked toward me, a smirk tugging her lips. Finally, as dessert was served, she struck. "You'll have to forgive the old woman," she told the table, her voice dripping with amusement. "She likes to pretend she's important, but really she's just along to help." A ripple of awkward laughter circled the room. Richard chuckled too, as though confirming the joke. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to shrink, to absorb the humiliation in silence. But then I remembered the palm tree, the torn, drawing the endless trail of receipts in my folder. I rose slowly, setting down my napkin, and walked to the head of the table. My voice, when it came, was steady. "Actually, Vanessa, I said there's something I think you should explain." The room fell still. Vanessa blinked, annoyed by my interruption. "What are you talking about?" "Take the kids outside." I placed my handbag on the table, drew out the folder, and laid it open. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Eleanor Grant. I am the founder and owner of the Crystal Bay Group 12 hotels across this state, including the one you're dining in tonight." Gasps circled the table. One woman covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Richard's face drained of color. Vanessa's frozen in a brittle smile. I slid papers across the linen bank statements, receipts, charges for spa packages, luxury dinners, designer gowns. "Every dollar of indulgence you've enjoyed these last months," I said, my voice rising, "was stolen from me. From accounts I created to support my family, not to fund your charade." Then Maya entered quietly, a tablet in her hands. "Mrs. Grant," she said with a nod. She tapped the screen, and on it played clips recorded by staff. Vanessa, berating a housekeeper, mocking a waiter, and finally, her voice in the lobby sharp and cruel, "Don't talk to her. She's just the help." The room erupted in whispers, horrified gasps. Vanessa's face blanched, her mask cracking, Richard's hands trembling around his wineglass. And for the first time in years, I did not bow my head. I stood tall in the light of my own truth, no longer invisible. The silence after Maya's video played was heavier than any storm. Guests stared down at their plates, unsure whether to stay or flee. Vanessa's painted smile had collapsed into a rictus of fear, Richard's knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. I looked at them both, and for the first time in years, I did not feel small. I felt steady. I reached into my handbag again, this time not for papers but for my phone. My fingers didn't tremble. I dialed Jonathan's number first, only to hear him say, "They're ready, Eleanor. Just give the word." So I gave it. Now. Minutes later, the doors of the Horizon Room swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by the town's police chief, Miller, a man with whom Jonathan had quietly coordinated for days. Gasps rippled through the room as the uniforms crossed the polished floor. "Mrs. Grant," Chief Miller said, nodding to me with quiet respect. "Are these the individuals you reported?" I turned to Richard and Vanessa. My son's face was pale, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Vanessa opened her mouth ready to argue, but I spoke before she could. "Yes," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. "They are the ones." The officers moved swiftly. Vanessa shrieked, the sound jagged against the chandeliers as her wrists were cuffed. "You can't do this!" "This is family!" she screamed. Richard half rose as though to intervene, but one look at the officers stopped him cold. His voice, when it came, cracked. "Mom, please, think about the children." I met his gaze and felt a final thread snap inside me. "You should have thought about them before you taught them to despise their grandmother," I said. "You should have thought about them before you stole from me." The officers pulled him back, reading his charges aloud: financial elder abuse, credit card fraud, conspiracy to defraud. Each word was a hammer striking the mask he had worn for so long. Around the table, guests exchanged horrified looks, some rising from their seats, unwilling to witness more. Then came the twist no one expected. Chief Miller turned toward Lucas and Bianca, the couple who had laughed so freely in the cabana days earlier. "We'll need to speak with you as well," he said evenly. "Evidence suggests you may have aided in fraudulent financial schemes. You'll come with us." Bianca gasped, her jeweled hand flying to her throat, while Lucas sputtered protests. But the officers were unyielding. Watching them being led away alongside Richard and Vanessa was surreal, a grotesque parade of people who thought cruelty and deceit were a kind of power. The Horizon room emptied quickly after that, whispers trailing behind departing guests like smoke after a fire. I stood alone at the head of the table, the wreckage of dessert and spilled wine spread before me like battlefield remains. For years, I had believed silence was the price of love. But that night, with uniforms escorting my betrayers into the dark, I realized something else. Silence had only bought me chains. By speaking, by finally showing the truth, I had broken them. And though the cost was steep, the freedom tasted like air after drowning. The Horizon room emptied into silence that night, but the echo of what happened traveled further than I could have imagined. Within days, newspapers carried the story, "Wealthy hotelier exposes family's fraud at gala dinner." Their faces, Richard's pale Vanessa's, twisted in anger, splashed across headlines that none of their old friends could ignore. The fallout was swift. The mortgage payments I had quietly covered for years stopped the moment I cut their access. The luxury house in the suburbs was foreclosed within months. The country club revoked their membership. Friends who once dined at their table vanished overnight, unwilling to be associated with scandal. For the first time, Richard and Vanessa stood alone without my money to prop them up or an audience to admire them. I did not rejoice. I didn't need to. Consequences speak louder than revenge ever could. What mattered most was this: I had stopped being the endless well they drank from without gratitude. I had reclaimed my dignity, and with it, my power. With Jonathan's help, I redirected what once funded their extravagance into something new, the Eleanor Foundation. Our mission was simple but urgent: to support older adults who had been silenced, exploited, or abandoned by the very families they trusted. We offered legal counsel, financial literacy workshops, and most importantly, a community where survivors of financial elder abuse could finally speak their truth without shame. The first time I stood in front of a small group of gray-haired men and women listening as they haltingly shared stories of children draining their accounts of being left behind when they had given everything, I realized I was no longer just telling my story. I was giving them permission to tell theirs. And then there was Tommy, that boy with the wide, earnest eyes who had quietly written down every slight he witnessed during those awful days. I saw in him something raw and unshaped, but bright, a decency untainted by greed. I called him into my office one afternoon, the sea breeze drifting in through open windows. He fidgeted with his cap, nervous. "Tommy," I said, sliding an envelope across the desk, "this is a full scholarship. College tuition books, everything you'll need." His mouth fell open. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because you noticed," I answered softly. "Because when others laughed, you didn't. You chose to see me when even my own family refused." Tears filled his eyes, and in that moment, I understood something profound. My story wasn't just about betrayal and survival. It was about legacy, not the kind measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you choose to lift. Richard and Vanessa had tried to write me out of my own life to reduce me to nothing. But by stepping into the light, I had rewritten the ending myself. And in that rewriting, I found something greater than vindication. I found rebirth. The Eleanor Foundation had been running for nearly a year when the letter arrived written in a round, careful hand. At first glance, I thought it was another thank you from a senior we had helped. But when I opened it, I froze. The handwriting was Sophie's. "Dear Grandma," it began, "I'm sorry for believing the things Mom said about you. I know now they weren't true. I miss you. Can I see you?" The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. For so long, I'd feared my grandchildren would grow up only with Vanessa's version of me, a pitiful, irrelevant figure erased from their hearts. And yet, here was Sophie, 10 years old, reaching back across the lies. When she came to visit, she was smaller than I remembered her eyes, cautious but hopeful. She stood on the threshold of my apartment, shifting from foot to foot until I opened my arms. She rushed forward, clinging to me with the fierce grip of a child who had discovered she hadn't lost her grandmother after all. "I didn't know, Grandma," she whispered into my shoulder. "I thought you were lying. But I know now. I'm sorry." I stroked her hair, breathing in the scent of childhood innocence, and felt something loosen inside me, a knot of grief untangling just enough to let hope in. "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart," I told her. "You were only repeating what you were told. What matters is that you found your way back." For the first time in years, I believed the next generation might not repeat the mistakes of the last. Sophie's presence was proof that love once twisted could still straighten itself if given light. Weeks later, another letter arrived, this one in a handwriting I knew too well Richard's. His words were different from Vanessa's shrill protests or manipulations. They were quiet, halting, even broken. He admitted to his greed, his cowardice, his betrayal. He didn't ask for money. He didn't demand forgiveness. He only wrote, "I hope one day you'll want to see me again." I set the letter down beside Sophie's, the two pieces of paper heavy with history. My hands trembled, not with anger this time, but with the weight of choice. Could I forgive the man who had laughed as I was humiliated? Perhaps, but not yet. Some wounds take longer to knit than others. Still, I left the letter in the drawer, not burned, not discarded, because life has a way of surprising us when we think all doors are shut. As I sat that evening on my balcony, Sophie at my side sketching the ocean, I realized something profound. Family isn't only the people who share your blood. Family is the ones who see you, who lift you, who choose respect over convenience. For 75 years, I had carried others until I was nearly broken. Now I was carried by truth, by dignity, by the small arms of a granddaughter who chose love over lies. And that, I thought, was enough.